Welcome to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Here's your host, Grant Bledsoe.
Hello, everybody. Grant Bledsoe here. Welcome back to Grow Money Business. This week on the podcast, my guest is Chris Hood. Chris is the head of business innovation and strategy at Google and joins us today to talk through how he helps businesses drive business value by using technology in a thoughtful way. That's what he describes what he does at Google every day. And coincidentally, it's really applicable to a lot of our small business owner listeners and clients in the financial planning firm. If you're somebody who's trying to drive business value, technology is a pretty good way to do that. And Chris joins us on the podcast to share how he thinks about that, both in small and mega size organizations, some of the technology tools he's seeing employed very frequently across industries today, and his thoughts on Elon Musk's bid to buy Twitter for $44 billion. This was a great discussion. It was a little bit out of my comfort zone being so technology focused, but Chris did a wonderful job of dumbing it down to my level, and I hope you enjoy it too. Hey everyone, I need to interject quickly to remind you all that nothing found in today's episode or any other episode of Grow Money Business should be considered financial, investing, legal, tax, fitness, or even relationship advice. It's content that you're free to use and to deploy on your own terms. And before taking any actions on content found on the show, please do consult with your tax professional, your attorney, or your financial planner. If you don't have a financial planner, head on over to threeoakswealth.com to learn more about what we do in terms of financial planning and investments and how we help clients on an ongoing basis. All right, Chris Hood, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here.
So I appreciate you lending a little bit of your time to come chat with me and our listeners. You have a very interesting role at Google. Could you share a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are today, and really what you do every day currently?
Sure. So I am a digital strategist, I think by trade, if that's a role that we can define. Uh, my background started a long time ago. I've had well over 35 years of experience in technology and more specifically in the media and entertainment industries. So I've done a lot of work within film and movies, television, music, video games, pretty much everything across the board. And I've always balanced this media and technology. There's a great story that I share a lot around when I was in college. I was asked, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, well, I want to be a movie director. And so when I went to college, I was thinking, okay, what am I going to get a degree in? I've got to get a degree in something that's going to help me. So I decided to go to film school. And then I would say halfway through, something triggered. And I was like, I guess I should get into technology. But at that time, technology was not a thing. It was not what we know it to be today. And I was very grateful that I continually balanced that passion of technology and entertainment, and it was able to drive me through my career and get me to Google. And now at Google, I spend a lot of time talking about technology and business and the intersect between the two. And there's a lot of conversation that we can have just around how technology enables business, but technology can't do anything without the business. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But today at Google, that's what I do. I spend a lot of time working with businesses and helping them understand how they can maximize business value by leveraging the technology and what that technology is designed to do. And typically I'm dealing with very large companies, the top companies of the world. But I spend some time with small businesses as well. And really the conversation is the exact same. You've got to understand who your customers are, what their needs are, and then again, use the technology to help you grow your business in the right way.
Interesting. So yeah, I'm guessing digital strategy was probably not a major back when you're making that transition from film school.
Right. Yeah.
So is the process the same if you're talking to a business with 25 employees as opposed to one of the biggest multinational corporations in the world? You got to know your customers. You need to know what you do, how you add value to that demographic. What happens next? How do you introduce the technology angle at that point?
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. As you said, and as I alluded to, the process is the exact same. Doesn't really matter. I typically like to use this concept of an outside in perspective. You start on the outside of your organization. That's usually with your customers. You want to understand what their experience is going to look like. And then you work your way into the inside of the business where the technology is going to live. A lot of times people do start with the technology. They say, "Oh, I've seen this new technology. It's called like virtual reality or crypto or, whatever you want to call it. Fill in the technology of the week and say, "Oh, I need that." And you're starting with the technology. And why do you need that? That's the question. Well, everybody's talking about it, so I must need it. It's the big thing. I've got to put it in somewhere. And that's not necessarily the case because why would you invest in a bunch of technology if your customers aren't asking for it? And that's a big question because just because, well, again, we'll say virtual reality, just because virtual reality is so huge and you're reading articles about it everywhere, not saying that right now today, virtual reality is huge. But just because you're reading articles about it doesn't mean your specific customers are asking for it, right? And so the key here is to understand who your customers are, what your customers want, what your customers' expectations are, and then figure out what that experience is. And then once you have that experience, figure out, okay, now how am I going to build that experience? What technologies do I need to make that experience happen? It's always customer experience technology, not technology. What am I going to do with that technology? I'll build some type of experience and then hope they come and engage with it. So outside in versus inside out.
Yeah, it sounds like that classic entrepreneurial struggle of there needs to be a visionary within the organization that can picture exactly what they want that customer experience to be and why it drives value. That should be directly driven by market research and customer data, of course. But it makes perfect sense. You can't just bolt on to the technology du jour for any frivolous reason. It has to be driven by some kind of vision of what you're trying to deliver. So
Sure. But let's look at that. Let's say you're an entrepreneur and you're sitting here thinking, oh, I've got a great idea. I guarantee your great idea did not necessarily start with the technology. Your great idea started with there's something missing. There's a need that's out there in the market. There's an experience that people are seeking. And even if you say I'm going to start with the experience, that experience is ultimately coming because of the missing piece that people, customers are demanding. And
right.
so you may jump over those people and think you're starting at the experience, but you're still ultimately starting. The reason it's missing in the industry or the marketplace is because customers are asking for it. And so it still starts customer, build that experience, figure out the technology that's going to support it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, process being the same between a smaller organization and a massive multinational corporation, your smaller organizations are a little bit more nimble. They can run out there and ask people directly and do a little bit more direct market research, whereas you have the huge bureaucracy to deal with in the larger organizations you're working with. Is that must be a challenge from your perspective, jumping through some of those hoops, right?
Totally and absolutely. Yes. And there's a lot of different ways that we can look at that in terms of next steps for those larger organizations. The first one being you've got to get rid of the bureaucracy. You've got to start breaking down those walls, getting rid of the silos. The death of a lot of organizations is when you have bureaucracy and silos in place that are managing or road blocking certain types of initiatives or more or less innovation within the organization. And so you can still just go out and ask the people. And as you said, it's a lot easier with a small company because you can just go out and ask. Although, let's get back to it. I have a great story about a small startup that still wasn't nimble. Um, but the big companies have to execute the same general strategies. They've got to ask the people, they got to use the data, and the data is ultimately going to tell you what to do. We get into this mindset of, well, I've got an idea. I know it's a good idea. I'm going to execute my idea. And you don't have the data to support it. And so you go off and you build something that no one wants, no one's going to use, and you wonder like what happened? Well, because you ignored the data. If you ask your employees or customers or people in general something and 90% of them said, "Oh, we should do this." And you don't do it, that's your problem. That's you. That's
Yeah.
not, your silos and your organizational structure. You've got to set up a culture that allows for data to be analyzed and then accepted and then acted upon. And if you can't do that, then again, it doesn't matter if you're a small company or a big company, you're just going to fall apart.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the core principles we have at our very small firm, I've got a couple of employees, is something I picked up from Ray Dalio, if you've ever read any of his books, and he really believes in radical candor and radical objectivity. You have to be open to new ideas all the time. And if you ever hear anybody in the organization saying anything that resembles, well, this is always the way that we've done it, or they're not open to new ideas, you have to be constantly synthesizing new information and then using that to make the best decision all the time. That's what will drive an organization. But human beings like to continue down the path because we get a little bit lazy mentally sometimes, and that can get you in trouble.
Well, there's two
Absolutely.
pieces of that. Lazy is one, comfortable is another. I
Yep.
get comfortable coming into work, doing my job, and all of a sudden you're asking me to disrupt what I do every day. There's a fear factor to that, and there's something else we call, emotional safety. Whereas I want to feel as if I come in with a new idea, no one's going to laugh at me. No one's going to say, "Oh, well, that's not how we do things. We've always done it this way. So go back to doing your job." That's not your job. Don't come to me with ideas that have nothing to do with your job. Like all of these things that we typically hear in an organization, that creates this sense of fear. And we don't want to share the potentially next big idea. There's a steel company in Europe that has a suggestion box, like you just put in suggestions. And one year, they received over 10,000 suggestions from all of their employees in the suggestion box. And out of those ideas, they were able to save their employees or save their operational cost over $1 million annually, just from the ideas that they were able to get inside of this box. Now, you can extrapolate that into any organization and say, one single idea potentially can either save you money or make you money. Why are you not investing in those? Why are you not creating that culture of you can come to us and suggest anything and you're not going to be laughed at and you're not going to be told no? We're going to look at it. We're going to take it seriously. But ultimately, we're also going to investigate it and look at the data to see if data supports what your idea is, and then also allow for that idea to evolve and mature and potentially materialize. If you can do that, now you have a true culture that influences innovation and progression and all the things that are going to help drive your business forward.
Yeah. Yeah. So when an organization of any size comes to you for help driving business value through the use of technology, as you've described, and they run into some of these barriers, are you actively helping them overcome some of those organizational issues, or is that mostly their problem? Hey, I helped you, but that's on you. You can't get it across the finish line.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it's as blatant as coming in and saying, "You're all messed up." you know,
Yeah.
like, you need to fix this. I can't help you fix this. I can show you that it's messed up and I can tell you that it needs to be fixed. But if you're wondering why you are slow to market or why you're losing customers or why you've got high turnover rate within your organization, I mean, it doesn't take rocket science here to determine what's wrong. Sometimes you just have to be told. And the challenge though also is that a lot of times the people, we'll call it the people within the organization, recognize it and understand it, and they want that change, but leadership is kind of preventing that from happening. And so you've got to have a conversation that's not just with the people who are doing the work, but also with leadership to say, hey, you've got people who are really strong and who really want to support the business and help the business grow. They care about your business. And if you're not listening to them, or you're blocking their ideas, that's also a problem. So yeah, I spend a lot of time just working with leadership and executives and people around the culture and how to improve that culture and different strategies that they can implement so that they build the right types of cultures within the organization. But at the end of the day, it's going to be up to them whether or not they do it or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there any specific type of technology that you're focusing on a lot or seeing used in this service that you're delivering more frequently than others? What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Yeah, I would say that there's a couple of big ones that everybody is talking about right now. Uh, we're going to put security aside because everybody, I think, cares openly about the security of their organization, their applications, their data. So, security is kind of like the no brainer. We've got to do it. um, Data is a big piece of it. And we've already touched a little bit on data. We have to leverage the data to make decisions. We get into big data and the massive amounts of different types of data that are out there and where data is coming from, how we're capturing and storing the data, security of data. Just data in general is the biggest piece. There was in media and entertainment, we always said content is king. And I think that's still true. We log into any of our favorite streaming services and we watch something that we like. And if it's good, we'll keep watching it. If it's not, we move on.
Hmm.
Content is king. But in businesses, I firmly believe data is king. Data is the root source of everything that we really do. We understand our customers through data. We understand their journey through data. We understand our products through data. And organizations who have a very strong data strategy is going to help them be more successful. Attached to data, we have APIs, and APIs are application programming interfaces, and they are the mechanism by which we can expose that data. And we can expose that data or capture new data in any various formats. So, really, if we were to overly simplify this, right now we are recording a podcast and we are using several APIs in order to record this podcast. Everything that you do digitally across the board, no matter what it is, you are using an API. You don't realize it, but it's back there. So something like you want to go to Starbucks and you want to order your coffee and then go and pick it up, and your loyalty rewards points for your coffee purchase are all being done through an API. If you have a smart home and you've got a thermostat or a system and you're saying, hey, turn on my thermostat, that's leveraging APIs. APIs are everywhere, bottom line. And organizations that invest in APIs to help them capture and expose and create experiences with that data, we also see are successful. We even have organizations that are monetizing the use of their APIs in the sum of millions of dollars in extra revenue, just monetizing APIs. And, we can get into that if you'd like. And then the third one that we're seeing is artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is Also, leveraging the data to do new and unique things. Automation is the primary one. Being able to say, hey, you may want this, or I need this, or automate any type of logic or function. So we're starting to see a lot more AI and ML into the picture. Also, leveraging the data through APIs to support different types of applications and experiences for consumers. So I would say those are the big ones right now: data, APIs, AI, machine learning, and then security on the top.
Let's talk about APIs a little bit more, specifically those being monetized. And an example that we use in our financial planning firm all the time is data aggregation tools. We have a planning system that lets us do a lot of modeling and analysis and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And a part of the program creates this dashboard of all your assets and liabilities.
Yep.
So if you log in, you can give the program view only access to see what's going on in your bank account. We can't move anything around by design, but we can see what's going on, which is really helpful when we're trying to help people make cash flow decisions. How big should your emergency fund be? How much do you have coming in every month? Where is it going? Those tools connect through an API as you described. This is an example of an API that gets monetized, because if you and I wanted to put our heads together and build a new financial planning tool, we're going to have to pay to play and we're going to have to pay a lot of money to use that pre-existing pipe to bring the data in. Is that a really prevalent thing? Is that specific to the financial industry? Sounds like other industries are monetizing APIs. How big of a thing is this in terms of revenue driver?
Massive. So there's a bank in Indonesia that's generating $50 million in revenue just by monetizing their APIs.
Wow.
But we also see it in AccuWeather, as an example. Anytime you go and you ask somebody like, "What's the weather?" or you go to like a news station and you're watching the news, and the weatherman comes on and shares, like all of that weather data is probably being generated by another organization, like an AccuWeather, and
Hmm.
all they're doing is paying for the weather data and then resharing it on their news channel. uh, we really don't have news people who are out actually doing their own weather research. They're getting data from somewhere. And so, like AccuWeather is a great example where they have tons and tons of forecasting and weather information all being shared through an API that you right now can log in, put your credit card in, get access to those APIs, get that data, and then use that data in your own applications or any number of other things. So we're seeing API monetization across fintech, financial services, healthcare, media and entertainment is it's happening in weather, retail, all over the place in retail.
Yeah.
So it really is everywhere. But the other piece of this, and I'm going to use your example, is that it's not only about monetizing, it's also about helping your organization innovate. So I will create a scenario here that's really crazy, and you'll be sitting here wondering, what are you talking about? But let's use your analysis and modeling and forecasting of financial statements. And let's just take a scenario where uh, any of you who are playing video games, we can pick any video game, doesn't matter. World of Warcraft, for some reason, is coming to mind, but maybe Call of Duty or something. And let's just say in World of Warcraft, there is its own financial system. And you can go into an auction house and you can buy loot and pay gold, the world's currency. But imagine if I was able to actually go into a financial analysis in virtually inside of World of Warcraft and say, okay, I've got this much gold and I want to invest it. And all of that magic sauce that you have for modeling and analysis, and you kind of translated that into a virtual currency and you implemented that into a video game so that characters in the video game could use their virtual currencies and invest in it in some way. That happens through an API. And it gives you an example of how if I expose my API, in this case, it's the modeling and the assessment of cash flow, and I published that as an API and I said, I'm going to charge you to use this API. and you put that API now into a video game, somebody's paying you for that kind of secret sauce. And now all of these people are getting this really interesting virtual experience with their virtual currencies inside of a game, leveraging the exact same logic that you have within the real world. Then, if you toss on top of that some AI and machine learning that's going to learn about your investment strategies and over time make better predictive analysis for you, that's what we're talking about.
Right, right. The applications for this usage and transmittal of data seem to be infinite. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah.
I
Yeah. It
mean,
could be.
layers
Yeah.
and layers and layers. So let's talk about AI a little bit then. And I have a rudimentary understanding of what it is and how it works, but I think a lot of people out there hear the words artificial intelligence and they're just thinking Terminator 2, and that's a bad thing because the machines are going to take over and enslave us all. Could you just summarize and describe in your words what AI and machine learning really mean?
Yeah. So AI is best example of it is if you've ever seen the movie Terminator, it's these robots that come and take over the world because they. I mean, on some level, you're right. On some level, AI is Terminator. It's scary, but there is a sense of reality behind some of that. Or any number of other movies out there like I, Robot, where we begin to define some rules around what AI or robotics can and cannot do. If you're a Star Trek fan, we get into higher intelligence like Star Trek Next Generation with data, and um, so, I think there are a lot of different ways you can look at AI, but AI ultimately stands for artificial intelligence. It is an intelligence that is attempting to understand things and process things without human intervention. So we've got AI that can play chess, as an example. Or if you've seen the movie War Games, and the best scene of War Games at the end is when it's playing tic tac toe against itself and it realizes, I can't win. Why can't you win? Because there's no winner in tic tac toe if the AI is playing against itself and it always knows and can predict what the next move is. That's AI. It's basically intelligence that is learning and allowing you to allowing the system to make decisions. Machine learning is basically the process by which AI is learning. Now, in machine learning, there is a way that we can, or basically, we have to teach it a model. So, we're talking financial modeling as an example. It could be any type of modeling, but you have to give it some data. It learns that data, and then it can most likely predict the next outcome. So, just as an example, if I said heads or tails, and I had a million records of heads or tails, random, it could look through all of that, and machine learning would try to find patterns. It would try to find, consistencies, and then it would be able to potentially predict what would the next flip be. Would it be heads or tails? Now, in that case, it's very generic, right? And there's only two options. But if we were to take a scenario like education, I teach part time as well. I have roughly 36 students within a course. Those 36 students are towards the end of their degree program. They've had 15 other classes before they get to me. Some of them are turning their assignments in on time. Some of them are not. If we applied machine learning to the record of every time they turned in an assignment for all of their classes, and started to analyze that, we could start to predict like this student always turns in their assignment a couple of days before it's due. This individual always turns in the assignment the day it's due. And this individual always turns in their assignment a day late, whatever the case might be. Now we can apply some other things to this. So we might say, this student always turns in their assignment 2 or 3 days before it's due, uh, it is now the day after it's due. I'm going to automatically send the student an email and say, hey, we've noticed you haven't turned in your assignment. Is there something we can help you with? Now, that's great for me as the instructor, as the professor, because I have no idea. I have no idea how often they turned in their assignments before they got into my class. And with 36 students, I may not notice that they turned it in a day late. Or if they did turn it in a day late, I might not realize that that's normal or, not uh, standard for them.
Right.
So that's one example. Now, machine learning is helping us through medical. It's helping us solve big problems. We see it in financial. We see anything that we need to better understand. We apply machine learning to it to help us solve problems faster. That's ultimately the goal here.
Right. And my understanding of all this is that if, for example, we have artificial intelligence that can play chess. That, call it an entity or program or what, I'm not sure what the correct terminology is. They can play chess, but they can't teach you to go tie a bow tie because that's outside the bounds of what the programming will allow it to do. Right. And so the fear of Terminator 2 taking over, as others have described it, is not really a rational fear because there is no physical there's no possibility of the machine going outside the bounds of what it knows how to do and what can learn how to do through machine learning. Is that a fair characterization? Just so we're understanding how, if we're going to use artificial intelligence to solve a complex problem in medicine, can it go outside that one problem? How does all this fit together?
Yeah, so it's a good analogy. It's a good example. I'll give you another example and then I'll make you probably more scared. So let's use fast foods. We are starting to see robotics materialize in fast food. And what you have is you have a robot that's sitting there and we'll just say flipping burgers. Now, the concept of this is I can go in, I can order a burger. There's no one behind the register. That can all be cashless. Place the order. The robotics and AI know exactly what I've ordered and can get the materials and the ingredients and make me a burger. And they get the patty and they put it onto the grill and it grills up, flip it onto my burger, serve it to me. Now, there's AI in there and there's robotics in there, but mostly that is just programmed intelligence. Keep the burger on one side for 30 seconds, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. Flip it over, do it again for 5 minutes, flip it over, put it on bun. All planned, all logic. What you're saying and what we're not seeing is there's no way for that AI to be able to look at that burger to say, this looks done. This looks burnt. This doesn't look like it's been cooked yet, right?
Mhm.
It's solely a kind of a timing exercise. It's been there for 5 minutes. Let's flip it over. Now, here's what gets scary. We do have AI as part of a visual, like Google has visual AI coming in now. These are things like if I actually ask Google to search for like a red apple, it's going to bring up a bunch of red apples. And occasionally you're going to get something else like a car that's painted in like cherry red type. But there's still some work around visually looking at an image or a video clip and being able to analyze it and understand what it is. We're seeing that materialize and there's massive growth in that. So now imagine the same robot at the fast food place with a visual AI component that doesn't have a timer that says flip it over in 5 minutes, but can actually analyze the contents of the cooking temperature and visual of it and say that looks done to me. I'm going to now flip it over. So to your point with the tying of a bow, I would say yes, in general, I can walk you through the instructions on how to tie a bow. I could potentially get a robot together to actually tie the perfect bow, but there is a certain level of logic in there that may not be present yet. For example, you're wearing a tie. Do we have a robot that says that tie doesn't match your shirt and I would have tied it in a different way? And oh, are we tying a bow tie versus a slip knot, or all of these different types of ways that we can tie and different visual elements? If you apply that now to the logic, then you potentially get to that next level where an AI is actually tying a bow for you.
Interesting. Interesting. So, slightly different direction for the conversation, but we're talking about having some vision of what we want the customer experience to be, and then inserting technology to achieve that vision and drive business value, right? And it seems to me that the mechanisms that we're talking about, the APIs, the use of data, security, AI, and machine learning, is just in a different stratosphere in general than the technology decisions that organizations had available to make 20 years ago, right? And if we think about the pace of all this innovation and the tech tools that we have available, there is no question that it has accelerated in a big way. Now we have these tools that it seems like the applications for driving customer experience, maybe driving customer experience is not the right word, but fulfilling customer experience, are vast and potentially endless. What are you thinking about over the next 5 or 10 years? Is this pace going to continue to accelerate? Will we have endless tools, or are the applications for the existing tools we have just enough to keep us busy for a very long time? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's a combination of both of that you alluded to. I definitely think that we are just at the beginning stages of what AI and ML, as we were talking, can do. I think we've got a long road still ahead of us of ways that we can implement existing technologies. We're getting more into some of these multimedia types of experiences. We're entering, again, we'll call it the metaverse. And there's a lot of conversations around what that's going to look like. Um, and so I think there's a lot of technology that's still at its infancy that we are going to be able to continue to learn about, evolve with, build with. That's very exciting. At the same time, that momentum is so fast that it's only natural new technologies are going to materialize. New technologies materialize when consumers start engaging with technologies in new ways. So we go back to the metaverse. As people start to engage with the metaverse, virtual reality and those types of tools and technologies might become more prevalent. There may be a technology that we're not even thinking about that begins to also materialize. I use a great example that I share with people in Japan. There was a scientist that just invented a taste TV. What's a taste TV? Yeah. Basically, it's like your scratch and sniff, but in this case, you can actually lick the screen of your TV and taste what's on it.
They
And
went taste before they went smell? I always thought they'd go
yeah,
smell first.
well, smell-o-vision, right? Like in movie theaters and
Yeah.
stuff. So the way that he created this Taste TV is using existing technologies. There's nothing necessarily original about it. It's just he was able to execute the concept. Imagine if that became a thing. And in 2 years, every single household had a Taste TV in it. It would depend on what the consumer demand of that was. But again, if we think about the metaverse and virtual reality and virtual worlds, could you see a environment where we get more senses involved? I was talking with somebody just about accessibility and handicap and individuals who have limited senses. Maybe I can't see, but I can smell and hear. Virtual reality right now today has nothing that is going to benefit you. But imagine a virtual reality where I can now hear the sounds of an ocean and smell what an ocean environment might look like, the sand and the salt. And so I do think we're going to start to see more of these multi-sensory types of applications materializing, which are going to create incredible new experiences for companies to be able to invest in. And we'll directly, get into again like the metaverse. And so there's an example of how uh, we're going to see new technologies materialize because of the demand or implementations that we have in the experiences that we're going to be involved with.
Interesting. And it seems like as those advancements take place, if you think about the pace, and I use the time frame of 20 years ago compared to today, what we were talking about earlier about unwillingness to disrupt your daily routine and struggles organizations have with change, leader any organization's ability to enact that kind of change and get everybody in the organization on board with it will become paramount, I would think, right? Because um, there are constant new applications to what you want that customer experience to be like, and if your staff is unwilling to disrupt the daily routine, step into a zone of discomfort temporarily before they figure things out, that's seems like it would be a huge hindrance to performance.
Yep.
Maybe another way to put it would be that ability is going to become a heck of a lot more important 10 years from now than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah, it goes back to your comment earlier about companies being nimble and being able to adjust on demand or as needed.
Yeah,
Which, by the way, APIs are one of the mechanisms by which allow you to make those adjustments faster. But I totally agree. 20 years ago or so, the conversation was, oh, I really want to implement this technology. We don't know if it's going to work. We don't have the budget for it. We're not going to invest in something until that technology matures. If it matures, then we'll invest in it. And a lot of people just continued to do business as normal, waited to see what would happen. And if it worked, then they began to invest. Today, I think you've got organizations that are constantly looking at all of the different types of technologies, trying to find ways that they can invest in little pieces of it. And they are much more nimble in terms of, I'm going to try this out, see if it works. If it doesn't work, moving on to something else and see if that works. And also, as we talked about, leveraging the data. If they see customers are saying, I want this, then they invest in that. And they can make those pivots a lot easier because the technology is so much more available
right.
and it's a little cheaper for the most part, right? Uh, Technology today is definitely cheaper than technology 20 years ago. So your investment strategy and your innovation strategy, your R&D, we'll say it, strategy is all completely different today. And definitely the companies that are more nimble and fluid and being able to just kind of test something and toss it out there, art of the possible and see what sticks is also where companies are finding the most success.
Right, right. So my understanding of everything that we're talking about today, as you can tell, is relatively basic. What do in our financial planning firm, we work predominantly with business owners in transition. Typically, there are fewer than 50 employees in these organizations. Someone who runs one of these organizations that's trying to drive business value using technology to do so, what else do they need to be thinking about that's relevant that we haven't talked about yet?
I, I don't know if there's anything that they need to think about. I mean, we can walk through it again. It really is going to be about your customers. So I know a lot of 50 plus types of businesses, and the leadership or executive, quite honestly, tends to have an ego. They tend to believe that they know what they want to do and no one else knows. I mentioned earlier I have a story, so I'll share this story as an example. I was working with a small business, had 20 employees, retail, online shopping. They had clothing that they were selling. And we were keeping analytics and tracking. And what they noticed was that a lot of people were putting stuff into the shopping cart, but they weren't making purchases. So we have what's called abandoned cart. People were abandoning their cart. And the CEO asked a very simple question: why are people abandoning the cart? And so we did a little analysis, and I said, I don't know. Why don't we ask? Like, let's actually ask the customers, why are you abandoning the cart?
Hmm.
The CEO said, no, I don't want to do that. That sounds cheesy. I said, well, how else are you going to find out? So I convinced the CEO to put uh, a survey in two locations and incentivized. I think you've all seen something similar. Fill out this survey, get $10 off your next purchase, or fill out this survey, get half off of a product. Whatever it is, incentivize. So we set it up and we did two. We did just a random one that went to random people, and we went to individuals who actually abandoned their carts. We noticed you abandoned your cart. We send them an email. We said, we would like to learn more about your experience. Please fill out this. And we had 4 or 5, I can't remember right now, 4 or 5 very simple responses. I abandoned my cart. It was one question. I abandoned my cart because not enough information about the product. You didn't have my size. The price was too expensive. Things like that.
Hmm.
Now, the CEO believed that the checkout experience was too complicated. And the CEO wanted the checkout experience completely redone, and believed that the abandoned carts was because it was just too confusing and people didn't know how to check out, which I disagreed with. But I said, okay, let's add that into the survey. So checkout confusing was also in the survey. We got 10,000 responses on this survey. That's a pretty good number. And out of the 10,000 responses, by far, the number one issue was the price of the items was too expensive.
Hmm.
Presented this to the CEO, and the CEO said, I don't believe it. Change the checkout process. You
Back to your point of you just got to tell them blatantly you're
right,
screwing it up.
right. Unfortunately, however you want to look at this, that business went out of business. That CEO lost their business. In part, I would argue, because they didn't change the price. They could have reduced the price down by, we'll say, $5, started to see if they generated more sales. They didn't listen to the data, and they didn't listen to their customers. It always starts with listening to your customers. And
Yeah.
most CEOs of small businesses just believe they know the answer. This is an example. I'm not trying to stereotype. I'm not saying that everybody's like that, but I'm telling you, you've got to start with understanding what your customers want and needs are, what their expectations are, facilitating that. Everything else after that does not matter. Everything else.
It's something that we run into a lot as well. And I go back to, when we're helping a business owner through a transition out of their business, maybe they've built something up, now it's time to exit. Unilaterally, every single time they think it's worth more, the business that is, than it actually is. Nobody likes to hear that their baby's ugly, but your baby's ugly. And there are things that you can do to drive value, part of which we're talking about today. But that ego and that mindset is part of what probably made them, got them to that point in the first place. But you have to be open to the information and outside perspective to make the best decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, we all can't get a $44 billion Twitter deal, but you know, I think there's a time when the ego is right. There's a time when your confidence and your beliefs need to come out. And then there's a time where you have to say, uh, I got to listen to my customer. I've got to listen to the experts. I've got to listen to, you've got to be able to accept the help. I talked with a CEO of a major fast food organization a couple weeks ago, and that CEO said one thing in the meeting. Said, "I'm asking you here because, quite frankly, I need the help." This wasn't about ego. This was solely about, I recognize that I can get the company so far, but I also recognize where I need help to make it happen. And so that balance between, doing what's right for the organization and doing what's right for your customers have to come together.
Yeah, yeah, that shows a lot of emotional intelligence and maturity too. I mean, we are so reluctant to be vulnerable with anything in our lives ever, and that shows vulnerability, which is coincidentally very endearing to other human beings too. But
Yeah.
it's hard to get over that hurdle. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yep.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about your thoughts on the $44 billion Twitter deal. Elon Musk has some grand plans to take it private, make some structural changes. Are you a Twitter user yourself?
I am. Yeah. You can find me at Chris Hood 1. Hopefully, now that he's going to take this over, I can acquire Chris Hood and not have the one in front of my name or in the back of my name. But that's my problems that I keep myself up at night about. Um, Look, I think that the acquisition and the conversation around Twitter is very interesting. I think that there's elements of capitalism. There's elements of free speech. There's lots of different elements. It's interesting as always to see conversation on both sides of really any debate, and trying to understand it and process it. But I think in general, the acquisition, is going to change social media in general. I think we're going to start to see just how technology can be implemented in new ways. If you think about it, between Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, any of the other kind of, we'll call them social platforms that are out there, we've been pretty stagnant in that technology for a good 10 years. And so, what I think might actually come out of this is a change in social media platforms. Hopefully for the better, we won't know. But, if we talk about the evolution of technology, we're at now potentially an evolution of social media platforms. And it will be interested to see where that goes.
Yeah, yeah. I'm I have a Twitter account. I don't use it very actively. I'm more active on other platforms like LinkedIn, but I'm a big fan of this move in general. He could screw it up. We don't know what's going to happen, but his core point, and yeah, there are elements of capitalism. I totally agree with you, but his core point is that in today's age, social media platforms are our town square. And your ability to get out there and espouse ideas and allow the best idea to win in a fair and objective way is a bedrock of free speech. Those are probably his words paraphrased. But his thought is you take it private, you make all the source code publicly available so that there's no veil, and you suspend and ban accounts in a very transparent way. And that doesn't exist right now. And it seems like positive things that he wants to do. Who knows whether the deal's actually finalized? It's the board's agreed to it, but now it has to go to the shareholders for a vote. It hasn't been finalized quite yet. So I'm kind of bullish on the transition because it has total wide-reaching ramifications across social media and elsewhere. I think, which is positive, perhaps.
Yeah, and if we bring your viewpoint back into just business, it's similar to like what we've talked about. There is going to be individuals within a business that may believe one thing and individuals in the business that might believe another thing. And you've got to be able to have that conversation. just like, we'll call it free speech. There's different opinions on what this actually means for free speech. But in a business, if you own a business and you've got teams and those teams are siloed and those teams are not communicating with each other or not open to each other's opinions and ideas within the organization to make that organization better, you've got a problem. And unfortunately, we see this in a lot of sectors of our lives today, but businesses have to be able to break down those barriers, have open communication, come together with different ideas in order to ultimately support the growth of that business.
That's a great analogy. That healthy dialogue has to occur. Healthy, respectful dialogue has to occur. And on Twitter, it's often not respectful or healthy, but the dialogue has to happen. I feel like, and that's well put, Chris. Well, that's a good place to end it, I think, my friend. Thank you again for sharing a little bit of your time. This has been really interesting to me. I feel like I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone in interviewing you and asking the right questions, but I think everything that you shared is going to be extremely valuable to our listeners. So thank you sincerely for joining me and spending the time.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Tell us about your show. Where can people listen to you talk about technology?
Sure. Yeah. I have a podcast. It's at Google Cloud and it's called That Digital Show. So you can find That Digital Show either at thatdigitalshow.com or across any of your favorite podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, any of them will have it. And or you can follow me at my website, chrishood.com.
chrishood.com. We'll include links to all that stuff in the show notes for those of you who'd like to follow Chris. Thank you again, my friend. This has been great.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Grow Money Business, the podcast dedicated to helping business owners grow both their wealth and business on their own terms. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you digest podcasts to ensure you don't miss out on future episodes and announcements. And feel free to submit questions to growmoneybusiness.com.